står för mig. Varmt välkomna ska ni vara till detta seminarium som bokförlaget Fri Tanke arrangerar. Jag heter Christer Sturmark och är förlagschef och förläggare på Fri Tanke. Fri Tanke är ju ett facklitteraturförlag som ni kanske känner till. Vi ger ut mycket populärvetenskap inom naturvetenskapliga området, men också en hel del samhällsfacklitteratur, current affairs. Och det är ju vad dagens seminarium handlar om, nämligen en bok om kidnappningsindustrin som ju har blivit en stor och omfattande och skrämmande industri. Inte bara kidnappning utan också människosmuggling av migranter. Det är en stor glädje för oss att ha Loretta Napoleoni tillbaks i Sverige. Hon var här när hon gav ut sin förra bok hos oss som handlade om Islamiska staten, ISIS. Nu är alltså fokus på kidnappningsindustrin och hon ska prata om detta i knappt en timme tänkte vi hålla på. Eller ungefär en timme. Med henne ska en Mellanöstern-analytiker från Utrikespolitiska institutet samtala som jag tror att ni känner till väl, nämligen Bitte Hammargren, författare, redaktör och som sagt Mellanöstern-expert på UI. Det ska bli mycket intressant tycker jag att höra deras samtal, så jag ber Bitte komma upp på scenen och helt enkelt ta över. Varsågod!
Tack så hemskt mycket. Jag är jätteglad för att vara här. Maybe I will switch to English now so Loretta can be part of our discussion. It's a great honor to have Loretta here again as our guest. I think that many of you read the feature article in Dagens Nyheter over the weekend which tells your personal story in an excellent way. And I don't think we need to go so much into your personal story here, Loretta. What's so interesting with reading your books is that they're always so thought-provoking. And you draw out the analysis in a very bold way, many times. The other time we met was when you published your book, Islamist Phoenix, Islamiska staten. And you managed actually to do something which is so difficult in these times. You managed to write very well timely set books in times that are so dramatic and changing all the time. Because if you write an article, you feel that when you go from the printer, events have just changed as you just print a simple article. But here you manage to write books about current events that goes right into the situation today. And one of your themes is the mismanagement of 9/11. The terrible mismanagement, that we still live in the aftermath of 9/11. I think I'd like to ask you about a situation where the book starts. It's also a very good read. It's not only an important book, but you start by writing about a cold November evening in Umeå about 10 years ago. And this is where the story starts, and this is also where you trail the money routes that we're going to talk about now. Please, Loretta.
Yes, so the book starts actually in Sweden. And I was part of a group from 2002 until 2008 was really fighting hard the invasion of Iraq. So we went to different countries in Europe to give speeches, but it was a heterogeneous group. There were authors, but also there were a lot of artists. And most of the artists, musicians also, came from Iraq. So they were people that escaped the country after the invasion in 2003 and became part of our group. So when we went to Umeå, I think it was 2005 already. We were really surprised because there were so many Iraqis that came to see us. I didn't know that there were such a large community of Iraqis in the north of Sweden. But the interesting story is this guy that came up to me at the end of the event, and he wanted to talk. And he pretended to be an Iraqi, but he wasn't. He actually was, I think, an Algerian. I'm pretty sure. But we never said, where are you actually from? But I could say that he was Algerian because his story was about Algeria. It was about the coup in Algeria, the military coup, and how he had to run away because his father was a member of the Islamic Party. They actually had won the election. So he ended up with a group of former mujahideen, who of course knew very well his father, and he became a smuggler in the south of Algeria, in the Sahel. And so this is a map that you can see. So he ended up in the south of Algeria, and he was working with a group of smugglers that mostly smuggle goods from Algeria to West Africa initially. But then, and then the story, of course, is the story of the book. All of a sudden, he got involved with kidnapping of foreigners in the same areas. And this is when he said, I have to go, I have to escape. And he did escape, pretending to be an Iraqi. And he escaped along the route of the migrants that this group was also managing, because they also branch off into trafficking of migrants through the Sahel and into Libya and into Italy. So that's how the story basically starts. And it's all after, of course, 9/11.
And it's also about how President Bush's Patriot Act changed the routes of the cocaine cartels in Colombia. And this is how the cocaine ended up in Western Africa and going through Sahel.
Yes. So you can see, okay, so this is the other map, which it gives you the idea of what happened. So in the book, there are several stories of people that ended up becoming either hostages or victims of jihadist organization because of the Patriot Act. And of course, all these people did not know the link. So the story is that the Patriot Act, there is a financial section of the Patriot Act which actually gave the U.S. Monetary Authority the right, still today, to monitor every single dollar transaction anywhere in the world. So that created huge problems for the Colombian cartel, because they couldn't money launder in the United States any longer all the profits that they were making, not only in North America, but also in Europe. So they had to find another way, and of course the alternative was using the euro. So the euro came into being in 2001. It was the ideal currency for money laundering to substitute the dollar. And there was an agreement between the cartel and the Italian organized crime, the 'Ndrangheta, which had still does, groups everywhere in Europe that could do this kind of activity. But also, and this is even more important, because they couldn't any longer money launder in the US was not anymore the route of the cocaine to come to Europe. All of a sudden, they had to find another route, and that route was via West Africa. So the cocaine would go from Colombia to Venezuela, and from Venezuela to West Africa, Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau was the ideal place. They basically bought Guinea-Bissau. And then from Guinea-Bissau all the way across the smuggling route of the Sahara and the Sahel to either Libya or Algeria. So that was the way.
And then in those failed states, and also in this Sahel area where actually the tribes and the nomads control the areas. It's not the security border guards. It's always the local nomads who have control of the area. They suddenly started to realize that they would make better profits going from cocaine smuggling to hostage taking.
Yes, so there were several groups of former mujahideen that lived with the nomads in this area. Of course, all of this area is a highly destabilized area. You realize that since the fall of the Berlin Wall, all of this area has become progressively more and more destabilized. So these groups control territories that were quite large. Anyway, one of these group, there was Algerian group, decided in 2003 to use part of the money that they were making smuggling cocaine for the cartel to kidnap foreigners. So they kidnapped 32 Europeans, tourists, people that were in Mali, visiting the ruins of Timbuktu, in Mauritania, trekking. I mean, this was a very popular destination, especially for Northern Europeans in the winter. So they kidnapped them, and they managed to get 6 million euros in ransom. And
for the 32?
For the 32, yes, for the total, the 32. And with that money, they founded Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. So Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, has nothing to do with the money of the Saudis. It's actually a completely self-funded organization with the money of the ransom and the money of the smuggling of the cocaine. So a new phenomenon is taking place, 2003.
So this is more jihadi business with, I mean, jihadism is a sort of a ideological framework, but it's so business oriented.
Oh yeah, these guys were clever because, I mean, they had to survive. I mean, think about, you are in the Sahel, in the desert. All you have is your knowledge of in combat, because they all came from Afghanistan, from the anti-Soviet year, and you have the weapons. So what do? You become like a little mafia,
Yeah.
basically a local mafia. So this is why in the book I talk about criminal jihadism, meaning where is jihadism and where is criminality? I mean, the boundaries are so blurred that at the end, these people are, to me, at the same time criminal and jihadists, depending on what is their convenience.
You're also highly critical of the way Western governments handle the issue of paying ransoms for hostages. And you're highlighting the case of Italy, your old home country,
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
you can give us an idea of how this criminal jihadism could trigger the prices of
Yes.
the hostages.
So basically what happened is in 2003, there was this first major kidnapping. Now, previously, kidnapping was never a form of terrorist financing. This is something that we must understand. There was no major kidnapping that took place before 2003, which was used to fund a terrorist organization. So what happened was that it was so successful that all of a sudden other armed organizations linked to Al-Qaeda everywhere in the world started to do the same thing. So all of a sudden we have a major kidnapping crisis. And what is the response of the governments? The response of the government is silence, meaning nobody really knows what happened. There are no major reports from journalists. The media ignore completely what was happening. So the people did not know that certain areas were particularly dangerous. Mm-hmm. So after this 2003 kidnapping, people kept going to Mali on holiday, and they kept being kidnapped.
Actually, there is a Swede who was kidnapped. He's still held hostage there.
Yes.
Johan
Yes.
Gustafsson.
Yes, exactly. So people, that's the first thing. The other thing is the payment of the ransom. So governments start paying ransom. So if you pay ransom, of course you're going to be kidnapped more and more because it's a good business for the kidnappers. But they denied. Everybody always denied. So there is this lie, this huge lie that surrounds this business. Certain countries pay more than others, and you wonder why. Because the truth is that if you bring home an hostage, you have automatically a propaganda element in your favor. Any government that brings people home is looked as a government that has succeeded. I mean, it's a very strong psychological element to bring home your own people. Now, people, of course, don't know that in order to bring these hostages home, there's been negotiation, there's been payment of millions.
And what sort of money are we talking about here?
Well, the Italian, I mean, so imagine 2003, 6 million for 32 Europeans. The biggest payment that the Italian did was in 2015, the most recent, and it was 13 million euros for 2 Italian girls.
Sure.
The last payment was in December of 2016, and it was between 5 and 6 million euros for 3 people. They were kidnapped in Gat, you can see south of Libya. They were working for a company, an Italian company that was doing maintenance in the airport of Gat. Gat is one of the main points where all these routes of smuggling and trafficking actually meet.
And you also describe how Al-Qaeda or their various branches outsmart Western governments, because you're also saying that the idea that Western governments would cooperate when it comes to hostage taking, it's a mere fantasy.
Well, this is actually, this one of the most amazing things I discovered during this research, is that European government, Western government, any government compete with each other. So let's say, there are 5 hostages coming from 3 different countries. Each government tries to get its own people before the other. So you're scoring. Here you are, abroad, people. Now, the shocking thing is that the Islamic State knew that. So the Islamic State had experience in negotiation. We don't know how or why, but for sure they were very experienced. So what they did not negotiate with all the governments together. They negotiated with one government at a time, and they started with the governments that pays the most, so that the others all of a sudden were forced to increase the amount of ransom that they wanted to pay in fear that their people would not be released. So imagine, they started with the Spanish. Imagine the French went crazy, because the French said, oh my gosh, they're getting the Spanish out, and if we don't get ours out, what the French people will think. And then they went from the French, they went to the Northern Europeans, which are the ones that pay the less. So it was absolutely brilliant the way they played these governments. And they took our money. We're talking about taxpayer money.
Huge money. And I mean, you mentioned already that governments made one striking mistake, willingly or whatnot, by not telling people about the dangers of going to these areas, because it was so silenced about the hostages from the beginning, so people continued going there.
Yes.
The supply of potential hostages was filled.
Well,
up to a certain point.
The reason why the government didn't say anything anywhere in Europe is, partly because they would have to admit that they're paying ransom. And of course, this is something that no government will ever admit. But the other side is also that all of this was happening and still happens because of the failure of globalization. So this would not have happened without 9/11. This would not have happened.
Why?
Well, because of course, 9/11, the response to, think about, before 9/11, jihadism did not exist. There was nothing here. I mean, there were, as the guy in the beginning of the story, the Algerian was named, he told me was Rashid, which of course is a false name, because it's not an Algerian name. But what he said we were surviving smuggling cigarettes and few other products from Algeria, to Mali. So it wasn't a big business. It was just survival. None of them was dreaming about the jihad. None of them wanted to. But 9/11, of course, changed everything, absolutely everything. But the response of 9/11 is what has endangered all of us. I mean, think about the introduction of the Patriot Act was done within 3 weeks. They had it ready, and there was no consultation with Europe, nothing like that. So he exposed Europe and the euro to the money laundering activity. If you look at the statistics of the consumption of cocaine before 9/11 and today, you'll see that skyrocketed. Because all of a sudden, Europe became a very good market with one single currency. And that's, again, part of the globalization. So these are all the dark sides of a policy that for sure was well-intentioned, but it didn't work out because we didn't think about what could be the negative consequences.
But if we go back to the issue of paying ransoms or not, you're also an advisor to governments on counterterrorism.
Yeah.
So what is your advice to them?
My advice is of course not to pay the ransom, but not because you want those people to die, the hostages, because the truth is that governments have deep pockets. So kidnappers know that a government can pay much more than a family or a company. So if you let the family handle the negotiation, you end up paying less, which means you give less money to people that then tomorrow may actually put a bomb in one of our cities, or that tomorrow will carry on fighting in the Middle East. So that's the first element. The second element is that a lot of the stories that I use in the book are stories of people that have gone to extremely dangerous places without really understanding the risk. There is a lot about freelancer. So what happened is that because of the kidnapping crisis, all of a sudden, major media outlets decided not to send anybody in those areas. But the media, of course, wanted to continue to cover the stories because, of course, this is how you sell a newspaper and how you get people to listen to your broadcast. So they use freelancer. Freelancer went there by themselves, paid 200 euros per article, risking their life. And of course, these were people with no experience, but also with no money for protection. These are the people that were kidnapped. And in the end, these are the people that also had to have a government to pay for them because nobody else was going to pay. I mean, they were not working for anybody. So you see, it's extremely complicated, the way this industry actually works. And because nobody wants to take any responsibility. I mean, personally, I think the media is very responsible. I spoke with a lot of editors across Europe of major newspaper, major media, and they admitted we are responsible for what happened to these people because we use them. And think about also the false news, the fake news. How do we know that these freelancers are actually reporting the truth? They don't have an editor, they don't have a boss, they don't have a fact-checking, nothing. So this is also explained why we didn't know anything about the Islamic State until May 2014, when the Islamic State actually passed on to the Financial Times a series of documents that proved its existence and also how rich it was.
I mean, coming from the media background, I must say that I know editors who refuse to buy freelance articles from dangerous spots because they don't want to feed this. But then you have the other problem. Those are blank spots. We need reporting. What to do?
Oh, I mean, I agree with you. This is a serious problem. But this is part of the problem that we're facing today. So the case of Syria, I think, is extremely interesting because in the case of Syria, the media has projected an image which is completely false. In Syria, there are no good and evil. Everybody was evil. So the Free Syrian Army...
Everybody holding a gun was evil.
Well, I mean, everybody was evil because, at the end of the day, I mean, think about, the war in Vietnam. People went to Vietnam, reported, did quite a good reporting. They were embedded with the U.S. Army, which, of course, was, under a certain point of view, was the enemy, if you were a liberal in the U.S. But still, you went in with people that protected you, and you could report atrocities that these people were committed, which, we saw it. But here, the people that went embedded with the so-called Free Syrian Army or rebels, they were kidnapped by the people that were supposed to protect them. This is what I'm saying, everybody's evil. So nobody went embedded, of course, with the Syrian army. But those that went embedded with the various groups ended up being kidnapped by these groups, because for these groups, the value of a journalist was not the fact that you would go home and write an article saying the truth. They were not interested in that. The value was how much his government was going to pay.
But then there is also what you, I think you call it the trickle-down economy.
Yeah, this is this is the area of,
Which, because in failed states or in disrupted societies, there are also families of the kidnappers or others who need to survive, and so there is money trickling down.
Yes, I mean, this is an industry that in the end is a sustenance industry everywhere it takes place. So in the Sahel, of course, these people were able to, with the money of the ransom, to pay more fighters, for example. So the families were paid, especially for young adolescent kids. But the same story is in Syria. What we see in Syria is that all of a sudden, with the civil war, the economy is linked to the war. It's a war economy. So we see that people are kidnapped. The Syrians, the wealthy Syrians, are kidnapped by the Assad regime, so that the family pay rich ransom. And as soon as the people are freed, of course, they go abroad. And the rebels or the Free Syrian, whatever you want to call them, the jihadists, kidnap foreigners. And with those money, they control the territory, which can be, any territory, of course, you can see up there, Syria. And controlling the territory means that the people living in that territory were dependent upon the group that was in charge. So it can be warlords, can be jihadists, criminal gangs, or the so-called Free Syrian Army.
The title of your book in English is Merchants of Men, which actually comprises more than just the kidnapping industry. And one can also observe that the market for hostage-taking has been depleted because less people would take the risk of going there. So what happened then to this criminal jihadism? They tapped into a different business, you claim.
Yes, so what happened is that this is a short-term business because, of course, even if the government keeps it quiet, at the end of the day, people start discovering that there are certain areas where you don't go on holiday anymore, or there are certain areas where you do not go and work as a freelancer anymore. So it's just short term. It's a very profitable business, but it is short term. A much better business that you can tap into long term is actually the smuggling of people. Now, not trafficking, because the word trafficking actually means something more. But smuggling of people from areas which are highly destabilized. And of course, these are the areas where most of these jihadi stroke kidnappers actually operate. On top of that, these kind of organizations, they have the infrastructure to get into the smuggling business of migrants very easily, because if you think about, they were smuggling products, cocaine, for example, in the Sahel. They have camps where they kept prisoners, the hostages. They have the people that know the routes in order, to reach the Mediterranean. So at the end of the day, they have everything in order to branch into this business. So what we're seeing in the Sahel and also in Syria, but also in Somalia, is that the kidnapper then all of a sudden, become the smuggler of people. Sometimes only for part of the route, because of course that's another thing that I discovered, is that you do not pay somebody in Chad in order to reach Sweden. The journey is piece by piece, so you may pay somebody from Chad to take you to Algeria, then from Algeria somebody will take you to Libya, then from Libya to Italy, then to Germany, and all this stuff. So there's not one single organization. So this is not the mafia, this is not organized crime, pyramidal structure. This is actually much more a sort of globalization phenomenon where you have all this horizontal kind of scheme of crime, and it's different groups that often don't even know each other. So it's even a new type of criminality that we're facing, product of this globalization process.
So to understand what keeps conflicts going, we need to have more knowledge about this clandestine economy and this business thinking of the groups. But I must ask you, Loretta, I mean, when you say that those who used to take hostages later changed their perverted business into smuggling of migrants or refugees, is this something that it's not only that you assume that this is the case, can you verify this?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, of course I verify the case. I think I have here something. Yeah, so this is, so I'll give you the most recent example. Is 2015, if you remember, in the summer, Angela Merkel opened the gates of Europe, basically, and you saw the massive exodus of people. So these are prices from that year. And people, of course, had to find a way. They were not airlifted to Germany. So there were different routes that they could go, and at different prices. A percentage of these prices ended up being pocketed by armed organizations, jihadist organizations that control some of the territories where these people were actually moving. So you see that from Turkey, from Istanbul, straight to Sweden was $10,000. But to get from Syria to Istanbul, you had to pay somebody to take you out. Most of the people went through the caliphate, through the Islamic State, because, of course, it was the easiest route. There's only one authority, so you pay only one tax crossing the border. Well, if you were going the other side, so the west side of Aleppo, the situation was much more complex because you had many groups controlling the territory. So you had many roadblocks, and at each roadblocks you had to pay a tax. So the smugglers would go through the caliphate. The Islamic State did not do smuggling, but he levied a tax for anybody that was heading for Turkey. And this tax was paid per person crossing the border, but also with the same vehicle that they used to carry the people across the border. The smuggler would then come back in carrying products that they would sell at the black market inside the country. So they tax twice.
I've traveled on that border several times,
Yeah.
but I would actually add that it's not only through the Islamic State control areas.
Oh, no, it's all
because
over.
this border was so porous,
Yes,
I mean, and
yes.
open for some time.
Yeah, but inside the caliphate, of course, you have you could not cross the caliphate without paying somebody.
No.
But there were the roadblocks were, because there was only one authority, you were not paying several times. So it was the best possible route in order to guarantee that you would reach, the other side. So, and then you get to Turkey. So, how much did it cost to cross over to Turkey? Between $2,000 and $3,000 in 2015. So you can see that if you went by boat, for example, that would cost you between $1,000 and $2,000. So the prices are different. Cheaper to get to Lampedusa, but then, of course, there you risk. The risk is very high because the death toll on that crossing is very high. In Libya, if you cross from Sirte in 2015, which is a territory which was controlled by the Islamic State, for example, you would pay more money than crossing from the west side of Libya, but you had better chances of survival because the Islamic State was controlling the number of people that the smugglers would put on the boat, so that the boat were not overcrowded. The Islamic State levied a taxation on each person who was crossing that, of course, the smuggler would pay. So at the end of the day, you paid more, but you had better chances of getting there. So, I mean, it's quite complicated. There is no one single rule. And this is what comes out, is that it's a highly decentralized industry where a lot of people are participating because of the nature of the business. You cannot have the same model of the organized crime. It would not work because the migrations are massive. That's the other I mean, look. So it's impossible to think that you can have an organized crime controlling all of this. That would be ideal, because if you have organized crime, you can go after that. But how do you go after a decentralized model like this? Each little segment is handled by different groups.
Now we have the upcoming EU summit in Malta, where they might try to get a deal with Libya for controlling the borders. But one could also argue that we have a history here with Berlusconi's old deal with Gaddafi, which was also helping inhumane treatment. And there's also a reason why people are trying to come to Europe. The other day, there was a prize ceremony in Stockholm for the Olof Palme Prize, which was awarded to the mayors of Lampedusa and Lesbos. And they are arguing that they sort of represent the soul of Europe by helping, rescuing people who've managed to come to the islands.
Well, I mean, it's here we are. This is Europe. So, and you can see the importance of Lampedusa and Lesbos, because these are the two entry gates. I mean, I think that number one, if you look at the people that are coming, these people are not only Syrian. In 2015, there was the highest percentage was Syrian, but most of the people come from all over the world. So we're talking about Central Asia, Bangladesh, for example, and Afghanistan, Indonesia also. Some people even from Pakistan. The route is always the same. They come through Iran into Turkey or through Iran into Syria, and now from Syria down to Libya, because the borders with Turkey are now sealed and the Balkan route is closed. Yeah. Then we have the East African and the West African, the Central African, and part of the South African. They're all coming. Okay, so most of these people are not political refugees. In fact, the percentage of people that get the status of political refugee is very, very small, but all of them are economic migrants. That doesn't mean that
all of them? Eritrea, Sudan?
most of them are, because Eritrea and Sudan, absolutely. But then when you go and look, the actual classification of a political refugee requires that you, by living in your country, are persecuted and you will be most likely killed by the regime. A lot of these people are not even living in cities. They are escaping major disaster, which is, of course, climate change, anarchy. So it's also very difficult to prove because, most of the people arrive with no documentation, nothing. It's the story at the beginning of the book. That guy came to Sweden lying. He said it was a refugee from Iraq. It was not true. Okay? So what do we do about this? These are serious moral and ethical issue. I didn't feel like telling him, oh my gosh, you are a liar. I thought fantastic that you managed to get here. But imagine when you multiply this by the millions. This is not only a human issue. This is actually an issue of security of Europe, and it's an issue of the failure of Europe and the West to manage globalization. So it is our responsibility. But we cannot solve it by opening the borders. We need to solve it by preventing all of these people from leaving their home because they can't survive.
I must challenge you somewhat there.
Absolutely,
because I think all of us in this room probably know people who've come here as refugees for very solid reasons, and this is the case, of course.
Absolutely. So do I.
But what do you suggest then? Should Europe do like Trump, close the borders?
No, it's not, I don't know how to go back. Yeah, so, okay. If you look at this map, I don't have it with, but before 1989, there was nothing like that. 1989, okay, look at Somalia. Somalia is a good example. There's a lot about Somalia there. Okay, Somalia was run by a dictator. The dictator was bankrolled by, the Soviet and then, by the Americans, so that the conditions for the civil war were laid down by us, okay, by the Cold War. When the wall came down, forget, who cares, right? Let's leave Somalia to where it is. Do you remember? So, and of course, the transition to democracy, as I wrote in my other book, Rogue Economics, was a disaster. A disaster. Oh, wow, we're spreading democracy. But we also spread poverty, civil war, slavery, you name it. But we were totally indifferent. 1990s, did anybody discuss this? Not at all. In the meantime, Somalia became a failed state. So, you see, that's what I'm saying, is we failed. We knocked down that wall. We went through a process of globalization. It was a failure. And the reason why today we have Donald Trump is because we have failed. Mm-hmm. He was elected by the Americans, the champion of globalization. Now, I think it's time that we actually say that. This is so if we say that and we say, okay, we failed. Why did we fail? Then we can do something positive in order to help these desperate people not to go through this. But if we ignore it and we say, okay, let's open the gates, you know where we're going to go? We're going to go straight where America is.
And now, yes, and this is a theme in your book, and I think we'll have time to go into that. But before... European Union is now trying to copy its deal with Turkey to other countries in Africa, for instance. So you suggest that this is a proper way to handle it?
No. What I say is that the deal with Turkey is the wrong deal. Absolutely. We can't put them in concentration camps. Because, I mean, where do you think they are? They are in concentration camps. But even in some European countries, these people are put in conditions that are inhuman. And this is where the next generation of jihadis will come from. So we went through 2003, invaded Iraq. 2007, everything is over, and then we got the Islamic State, 2014. Now what is going to happen? Oh yes, we get them in. Those kids that come in age 10, in 10 years, in 7 years, are going to be, the next terrorists. Because, what do you think they're going to do? They have no education. They live in terrible condition. They're treated like pariahs or not even second-rate citizens. I mean, they're hated by the Europeans because, let's face it, this is a racist continent. It hasn't changed since the 1930s. So I don't see any change. So, no, it's true. I think we have to say those things. I think we need to say those things. Because if we don't say those things, we're going to do the same thing we did in the 1930s. How many people in the 1930s in Germany really believed what was happening? Denial.
And you were not surprised that Trump won the election?
No,
I
even
did part-time
bet. I bet with the bookies. I got Trump 1-9. I bet. It was clear that he was going to win. I mean.
So what's your perspective for Europe? This is a year of elections in Europe now.
Where? Here? In
Netherlands,
Europe?
France, Germany.
I think Marine Le Pen has a very good chance to get in. Very, very good chance. If Marine Le Pen gets in, that's it. Europe is going right big time.
Are there sort of political forces outside of Europe who wants to see this disintegration of the European
Union? I think we're doing it ourselves, as we always did. We are the best at destroying ourselves. I don't think anybody can be as good as the Europeans. I'm sometimes I go around Europe and I do this, and what I discover is that we are destroying ourselves without really understanding what we're doing. This is the real issue. We are pretending. It's this hypocrisy that is almost built in our DNA. So we got Brexit. This is how the end of the book is Brexit and Trump, basically. So we got Brexit. And how many people actually admitted that they voted for Brexit? I don't know anybody.
The shy Brexiteers.
Anybody. And yet, so you see what I mean about the hypocrisy. And this is why the opinion polls don't work, nothing works, the forecast, nothing works. So Europe, I think in France, Marine Le Pen has a much larger support than we actually think she does. I don't think this idea that she's going to get the majority in the first round and that all of a sudden there's going to be a front, as it happened with our father. Let's not forget that our father almost won over 10 years ago, when things were actually much better than they are today. So, and tell me, who is going to be the leader of this second round? Sarkozy? I mean,
No, not Sarkozy, Fillon.
Fillon with the story of the wife.
No, or Macron.
That he said he doesn't want to be. He said, if we investigate me, I'm going to step out. Who is going to vote for these people? I see it this way, but I hope I'm wrong. But I think I'm going to bet on Marine Le Pen also.
Oh.
No, why not? I mean, why not? So, if she wins, that's it.
So what's your advice then? Since you are an advisor to governments in Europe, how should responsible politicians handle this?
But I only advise, and then people will take whatever I say and they'll decide. But I have no political power whatsoever. I just say these things. What I can tell you is this, that everybody was shocked when Donald Trump nominated so many generals in his administration. Okay? I can tell you that my personal experience is the people that know better what is going on and the people that listen better to the advice, not only my advice, but the advice of people like me, are actually people in the army, which is interesting. The people that are mostly worried about a potential war in Europe, a destabilization of Europe, and also a sort of swing to the extreme right are the military people. Politicians, not at all. Think about this, because again, in the world of fake news and propaganda, the common idea is that generals want war. Why would a general want a war? I mean, a general doesn't make money out of a war. I would say that the people that make money out of the war is the private military industries, people selling the weapons. And those people, that industry, does that industry bankroll the army? Absolutely not. But they do bankroll the political campaign of lots of politicians. To me, this is so easy.
Of course, they have the war, arms exports have a huge area here.
This is a booming business for the traffickers, for the smugglers, for the jihadists, but for
private security
firms, you name it. Anybody is linked.
Arms industry.
Yeah, to the arm industry.
So they're all intertwined.
Yes, but it's not a good business for the regular army. Not at all.
Well, as you can see, you give us so much food for thought here, Loretta, and I think that if you read the book, you will find out as well. I must ask you, it's since you're into this follow the money trail, which is so fascinating. What will be the next topic? The topic of your next book?
Well, I have two possibilities. One possibility is that doing this research, I came across so many of these so-called charitable organizations. They are super corrupted. They are channels for different kind of businesses. I had a lot of difficulty.
All of them?
No, not all of them. But the secrecy that I encounter with government is mirrored by the secrecy that I encounter with all of these organizations. Don't want to talk, they don't want to know, they don't. So everything's secret. But some of them are really not very good at all. It's a huge business, absolutely huge business, which has really taken off, I would say again, after 9/11. So interesting. The other thing is that there is the possibility to write something on cybercrime, because somebody approached me and they asked me if they pass information about what is happening, which is absolutely scary. But these are two topics that, to be honest, I am thinking about, because in terms of my security, people always ask, "Oh, are you scared?" I don't think terrorists will do anything to me. But if I get into this kind of digging, I think I will start worrying about my own security. So I'm thinking, but you see how bad the world is.
Maybe just a last question about how you work with your sources, because you do have sources within the Islamic State as well.
Yeah, I wrote a book which was published also in Sweden, I think in 2005, which is called The Insurgent Iraq in English.
Uppror i Irak in Swedish.
I remember. We met then. And it is really not only a book that denounced the lies of the war in Iraq. Remember, at that time, of course, nobody was writing about that. But it's also a sort of biography of al-Zarqawi. So when I was